This is a presentation on the Reclamation of Gathang, Asserting Our Sovereignty for Justice, a collaboration between Djuyalgu Wakulda Local Language Governance Group and Western Sydney University. My name is Anjukuri. Nirun Waralen Guri bin Gubaga Baraiga. Nata Marun Naran Dangaiga Gu Guri bin. We are all standing on Indigenous land. I pay respect to the ancestors and all people here. Marumbu, thank you for the opportunity to share our experiences and knowledge. The Gathang language footprint captures three nations, the Biripai, Waramai and Gungrai, in what is called New South Wales, Australia. Gulwanyang and I belong to the Biripai country, north of Port Macquarie down to Jari Tari in the south. Our main river systems are the Wilson, Hastings and Manning. Our shared language has been bubbling, sleeping, as a consequence of the cultural genocide experienced by our peoples through colonisation. It is our collective, cultural and sovereignty right to learn, speak, share and teach our language. Djuyalgu Wakulda, to speak as one, seeks to empower our community through language. It is a Northern Biripai language group formalised in 2020 to grow the Gathang language through a number of language revitalisation strategies in the areas of the greater Port Macquarie, Wauchope and Laurelton catchments. The working group consists of members of the Gathang language community that have connections to the Northern Biripai region through language and whom are passionate about language revitalisation. There is an ongoing need for leadership and resource development in the language revitalisation space, and Djuyalgu Wakulda aims to be one space of many that foster and supports this need in Gathang reclamation and revitalisation work. The group consists of language activists, advocates, teachers, learners and speakers interested in a strength and solution-based approach to progress Gathang within the Northern Biripai community. There are 5 principles that underpin the work of Djuyalgu Wakulda. Cultural respect, recognising, valuing, observing and celebrating Biripai culture with culture, humanity and respect. Justice and equity, fostering justice through fair process. Transparent decision-making and valuing all voices. Leadership and accountability, demonstrating and fostering leadership and accountability to other Gathang language working groups, members and communities through Gathang language governance processes. Respectful engagement and strong partnerships. Sustained, respectful and inclusive engagement and partnerships with local organisations, language corporations, education groups and community members. Culturally responsive to systems and services, contributing Northern Biripai perspectives into the design, delivery and evaluation of policy, programs and services relating to the Gathang language.
Djuyalgu Gulwanyang here. So much of our business is around the receipt of language translation queries. When we receive one, we come together to unpack the request. I'll talk a little bit more about, some of that thinking that happens in that unpacking as we get together to discuss language translations. So When we come together, we'll do that unpacking, and then we get our translations checked by Mudabai Aboriginal Language Cooperative. And then we enter it into our word and phrase bank. The translation is then provided back to the requester with our Indigenous cultural intellectual property statement wrapped around it. So Bidderpie ways of being, doing, and understanding are founded in our interrelatedness with all things and expressed through ceremony, kinship, and our language. The framework for our worldview is like our butchin, dilly bag, which is held together by many weaves of garo, grass. Each weave connected to the other through strings of relatedness, kinship, and story. Butchin is strong this way. The intricacies of our strings of relatedness are reflected in our language words. Often words have layered meanings that reflect the multiple strings woven around a word or a concept. Part of the reclamation of language and decolonising is revitalising those intricacies. So Djuyalgu Wakulda is exploring this layered meaning in the way that we translate. There are three main places in the translation process where we particularly consider layered meaning. The meaning that is provided by the non-Indigenous field worker who recorded the word in the first place, the meaning we prescribe when we engineer new words, and the meaning a word holds within a certain context. Bara, for example, was recorded by a number of linguists and also recorded in conversation with Uncle Eddie Lobban, a Bidderpie elder from Perth Fleet. When Uncle Eddie uses a word, it is usually translated as meaning down. We also have written recordings of it meaning east or a place name for Old Bar. More research needs to be done on the original use of the word, but one thing that has stood out to us is how insufficient the word east is as a translation. So east is a magnetic direction represented on a compass, but for Bidderpie peoples, we orientate ourselves through country and story, not through a compass. So when we think of Bara, we might think about the sunrise, the river flowing on the outgoing tide, the ocean and all her stories, our three special mountains over Crowdy Bay and their story, the direction our ancestors travelled in different seasons, etc. There are layers to our understanding of travelling Baragul, and we want to work to make sure those layers are revitalised along with the word itself. Yukumal is a word that was engineered in order to translate the English concept of love. Yuku is recorded with the meaning heart. Ma is a verbalizer which derives a verb from a noun, so it becomes to make heart. And the ul is a nominalizer to turn the verb back into a noun, so we get love. One of the issues with the process that we followed initially to engineer this word is that we tried to prescribe the Western understanding of love and what that means, like Disney princesses married happily ever after, to our Gathang word. In actual fact, when we think on our cultural understanding of love, we think of those strings of connectedness and the intricacies of our kinship system. Yuku means heart, which is a sound in our chest. It could even be onomatopoeia, representing that heart sound, yuku, 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 yuku. But for us, love and strings of connectedness are probably located more in the region of our gut. So we have to consider whether the word we have engineered is translating our layered meaning, or is it a direct English translation? And what cultural knowledge are we using or losing in the process? The third consideration I mentioned is context. We are thinking more and more about where and how our words being used, where and how our words are being used, and does that align with Bidderpie cultural values? We had a language request from the science department of the school. They had a series of animal fetuses, which were being kept as specimens in jars in the science room. They wanted us to provide Gathang name labels for each of the specimen jars. When the language request first came through, Djuyalgu Wakulda, we initially began the translation work. But as the discussion progressed, we all began to agree that we didn't feel comfortable with Gathang being used in that context. For Biripai, Gulwanyang, that grey-nosed shark is our gimbai, our totem. The idea of having such an important kin kept in jars instead of being returned to country didn't align with our cultural values. So in the end, to maintain the cultural integrity of our language, we declined the request in that instance. The layered meaning and cultural integrity of our language is why our Indigenous cultural intellectual property statement is so important in the agreements we enter into when we provide language translations. It gives us the power to protect and reclaim language in a way that maintains our cultural integrity and enables us to continue decolonising our understanding of our own words. I've included some sections of our ICIP statement that particularly address this here. Many entities have approached us to collaborate over the years, particularly universities, and many times we have turned them down when they haven't demonstrated reflection and respect for power, place, and space within their project approaches. What we are often looking for is how they are checking their power at the door and enabling us to lead with respect to Indigenous governance and sovereignty. How are they reflecting on their place within the project? Where do they see themselves and how do they intend on navigating the space with us? Represented here by the snake is power. The snake often forgets its power, both real and perceived, in both place and space. It reminds us on the importance of thinking on how we tread, where we position ourselves when we are working with others. Place is represented by the shell. The shell reminds us to listen to understand first and foremost. It also reminds us of building an ongoing learning and respect in a spiral way, and that circling back for good understanding is important. And finally, space, the kangaroo, which can only ever move forward. It reminds us to keep moving forward with shared intention, purpose, and strength at every milestone. And it very much informs how we navigate space with each other. So we did make an exception to one university working on an app development project. And I'll now hand over to the project lead to reflect on their role within the project, on how they have worked with us within the context and framework we have led in a way that has privileged our knowledge and our sovereignty.
In this second part of the talk, I will briefly outline our project and highlight the ways in which it responds to the three notions of power, place, and space. The title of the project is Collaborative Development of a Gathang language phrase-based learning resource. The tool at the centre of the development is Listen and Talk, a digital shell-based technology co-designed by the Djuyalgu community in the Northern Territory, Western Sydney University researchers, and app developer eLearn Australia, funded by the ARC Centre of Excellence for the Dynamics of Language. This research aims to investigate the hypothesis that Listen and Talk can be used in revitalisation contexts other than Djuyalgu through observation and documentation of the development of a phrase-based learning resource for Gathang using Listen and Talk. Let's first consider power. The project came out of discussions over time with Biripai elder Rhonda Radley, who had observed the development of the app while completing her PhD at Western Sydney University. In 2021, Western Sydney researcher Caroline Jones and I were invited to give presentations to community groups, the Gathang Certificate 3 group, and an online workshop organised through the Djuyalgu Wakulda Gathang Language Governance Group, explaining the app and its origin. Participants expressed interest in development of a learning resource for Gathang. The project provides research outcomes, that is, understanding of the effectiveness of Listen and Talk as a tool to support language revitalisation in a New South Wales context. However, this requires establishing a relevant framework within which to observe community members with knowledge of Gathang language and culture, representing the three community groups, Biripai, Gurungai, and Moran, working with Listen and Talk. The research was co-designed with Gulwanyang and the Murbai Aboriginal Language and Culture Cooperative. The project provides opportunities for broad involvement across the 3 Gathang groups, including user testing of a prototype resource. The core research team is made up of a Gathang community researcher, Gulwanyang, and 2 non-community Western Sydney University researchers, Caroline Jones and myself. This aims to provide community representation in the research design, data collection, analysis, and presentation of results. The main language content development is undertaken by a working group with 2 representatives from each of the Birpai, Gurunga and Waramai community groups to ensure local cultural and linguistic differences are represented in the resource. A taster resource has been produced with 12 phrases to allow the group to consult more widely across their different communities. In terms of place, Gathang revitalisation efforts involving linguists and community members over the last 50 years have built a legacy of documentation, including text, grammar, and a dictionary that provide trusted sources of Gathang words and phrases. An important starting point for the working group was to select phrases from these sources relevant to the topics identified. Support for this process was provided by Western Sydney University researchers through collation of the phrases from the documented sources into one spreadsheet for easy reference by the working group during the sessions. Where an existing phrase cannot be found from the archival sources, the group works together to engineer a phrase with decisions informed by personal experience and knowledge of Gathang language, culture, and community. It is clearly noted that these need to be cross-checked by others before being put into the app. As in all language revitalisation contexts, Gathang community members have been contributing their time and effort with no expectation of payment over many years. A funded project such as this provides an opportunity for community members to be equitably remunerated for the work they're undertaking. The funding also allowed us to provide a physical space, a house in Foster, where the working group could work together face-to-face and on country. Funding for the project includes app development costs, hosting by eLearn Australia on a secure server in Australia for 5 years, as well as ongoing support over that period. Gathang language content remains the intellectual property of the Gathang community. All data, text, audio and images entered in the resource are fully recoverable, so the data will not be lost and can be reused in other projects. The project includes discussion about future sustainability of the app, providing mechanisms to extend the life beyond 5 years, allowing it to continue to develop in response to community needs.
Marungu, thank you for listening to some of the ways we assert our sovereignty through our language governance processes, how we are reclaiming our language through our translation work, and how we centre justice within the way our partners work with us. We would be happy to share any of our resources or information with other language governance groups in the language revitalisation space. You can visit us at djuyalguwakulda.org.au. Morumbu.